Hey guys, so today gonna answer a question that I have been asked multiple times and haven't made the video on it, but today I'm going to because I was asked recently and I thought, you know what, it's time. So the question is, what are the differences in the various ways that you can increase saturation in Photoshop? Mostly we're discussing the two key adjustment layers, which is the hue and saturation adjustment layer and the vibrance adjustment layer, right? So, acute Photoshop users might notice that the vibrance adjustment layer has a saturation slider and the hue and saturation adjustment layer has a saturation slider. The first assumption I thought many years ago was that they're the same, but that they're available to you on Vibrance in case you want to add a little bit more. Then I started figuring out that in fact, the two saturation sliders are not the same. They work sort of different. Now, first and foremost, Adobe is not what you could call forthright about what these saturation sliders do on the technical. I don't know what the algorithms are. I don't know what the mathematics are, but we have a little bit of information that at least can sort of corroborate what I've already noticed over the years. But how can we really get a visualization? How can we tell what's going on? Well, with a color chart. So this is a 16-bit RGB color chart, which reminds me, we're actually going to show you a fourth way to boost saturation that you may or may not be familiar with. And it's going to help us also further discuss, I should say, about the perception of saturation on screen. Never mind printing, which is a whole nother animal. But let's analyze, what is our color chart doing? Well, open up our color picker and we're going to go ahead and take a look. I have the full spectrum of colors going from red to red, obviously left to right. And then I have saturation going from 0 on the top all the way down to 100, maximum saturation on the bottom. You can do that in the color picker here. We can see, if I click down here, you'll see it's 100. And as I go up, the saturation, the S, starts going down all the way to 0, right? Okay, now we're not going to talk about luminosity and perception and everything else right now. All you need to know is that that's what's happening in this color chart. We have every color, maximum saturation, and the lowest saturation, okay? So let's test. I'm actually going to start with the vibrance adjustment layer because I think it's important to show that one first because the main hue and saturation layer is very interesting. It's more ham-fisted. So let's talk about vibrance. Okay, let's maximize it. If we push vibrance all the way to the top, off, on, off, on. Now, what you're going to notice, no matter what setting we use here, is that the brightest or the strongest saturation areas in the bottom are going to remain unchanged. You can't push further than that, right? But what is vibrance doing? Well, it's pushing more saturation into that sort of mid to low saturation area. Just a little bit. It is adding to the main part, but we can't see that, right? But that's what is happening. It's good to see that. So you can see that it pushes further than the brightest saturation, but gently. And you don't know how gently it is until you see the other one. So let's look at the saturation slider on the vibrance adjustment layer maximize. Okay, you notice that there's a steeper sort of push here, right? Okay, we do see a difference in the lower ones, just a little bit, because it's pushing that blend to make it a little bit harsher, right? In other words, perceived saturation, right? It also pushes up to a certain point of the lower saturated areas and then stops. But that cutoff, that sweep is a lot stronger, right? But it does cut off. What does that mean? That means that saturation on the vibrance slider boosts saturation in a way that still preserves-ish your lower saturated areas. Vibrance does that even more so. It's very gentle. It adds, first of all, less saturation overall. I'm not sure what the exact algorithm is. And then tails off near the low saturation, and the saturation slider on vibrance does that as well. Now, the hue and saturation slider, if we maximize it, boom, it is a linear sort of ham-fisted slam. Now, it has some protections in yellows and oranges because you can see there's not a lot of saturation that got pushed in there, okay? Protection just meaning that the algorithm doesn't necessarily try to boost yellows, maximize, or oranges. Now, the word on the street is that the reason why these saturation boosters, as it were, seem to protect yellows and reds is that that's where most skin tones exist. And if you have a portrait and you're boosting color a lot, the first thing that's going to go wrong is your skin tones. They can turn into like electric orange and then it looks bad. And this is why most of the time they say, oh, try Vibrance if you want to do that. But you also might find that Vibrance isn't powerful enough for the looks you want, which is why there's a secondary saturation slider, which is kind of what I was saying, that it's there to add a little more oomph in case Vibrance isn't enough. Okay, so you see the difference here, and you can even literally see the line. There's a point right here. Right here. In fact, oh, we can't really see it unless we flatten it. We're not going to do that. But you can see it's a hard edge. There's no like gentle fall off. It goes right to the max, and there it is with only a moderate protection in the yellow area. Okay. Now you'd see a lot more sort of chunkiness and pixelation and issues here if this was a very low grade JPEG compressed 8-bit image or something like that. That's why we created it in 16-bit full quality, so we can see exactly what's happening. So let's look at that again. This is maximum saturation with the hue and saturation slider. Okay. And then Vibrance max saturation is that. So again, what the technical is, I don't know. I don't have the math. I don't have the technical documentation, but I do have a perception kind of thing. You'll see that it gently boosts saturation all the way up into the lower saturated areas. And even then, what it boosts is very calm with Vibrance. And with saturation under the Vibrance adjustment layer, you get the same kind of thing, just more. And then you get the ham-fisted sort of slam attack on the regular one. Now, I have one more demo for you because some people don't know this, okay? But I have the same exact thing in lab mode, okay? And lab allows for something kind of interesting. If you go to hue and saturation and maximize it, now lab pushes saturation even harder. It completely abandons any yellow or orange protections, anything at all, and just says, oh, you want maximum? Every single pixel that has any type of saturation information is going to go to 100. And this is why sometimes people will use lab to boost color in a perceptual way. What I mean by that is that it's not that you're getting more saturation. You can't go past 100, but because you push into the lower saturated areas, you have no protections in place at all. You can get some interesting effects. It's not for everybody, but it definitely boosts the color of an image, especially if you're using it like in conjunction with maybe a saturation mask. It can really give you an extra punch because it doesn't try to preserve the lower saturation areas. It doesn't try to preserve yellow or orange or anything like that. That is a specific nature of lab. Now, converting that back to RGB, you're going to have some color profile issues there and some, converting maybe to do. And you're probably going to see a shift no matter what if you're trying to work with this maximum saturation. However, I just wanted to show that because some people don't always know that in lab, you can push saturation perceptually further. As you can see, this is maximum in RGB and this is maximum in lab. Again, it's a perception thing. Lab cannot go past 100%, okay? But it pushes the color further into the areas that are normally somewhat protected. I hope that makes sense. Let's turn that one off. Let's go back to Vibrance. As you can see, it increases. Also, by the way, Vibrance does not completely decrease color the way saturation can. You see how it just kind of takes some of the saturation down and then somehow makes it hazier. Again, that's a perception thing. Now, I hope that makes sense, but let's look at a sample image. Let's see what we can do with that. Let's see where this one is in RGB. Let's go to the RGB. All right, so based on what we said, if we push saturation maximum, what do we get? Well, you can see we get a lot of, it's 100%, right? It goes to everything. Unless it's like basically 1% saturation or 0, it just pushes color to maximum saturation. And you get all this weird sort of, what I call trace colors or residual colors because the hues are in there. And now you're pushing them to maximum. Well, that doesn't look that great, does it? If we go to Vibrance and push saturation, that's a little bit nicer. It's a little bit more protective of the lower saturated areas. And Vibrance, if you push it, it's really protective. It's so protective, in fact, let me go ahead and turn this on and off. It's so protective, in fact, that the lighter area, the cyan area of the water, Vibrance leaves it alone. Because it's like, you know what? There's a lot of color in there and it's kind of light. We're going to leave that alone. So Vibrance has one style of that. And of course, Vibrance's saturation is a way to get a strong saturation, of course, but still protecting much, much more than you would with the regular saturation, which is a linear thing, which is great for graphics purposes. Don't get me wrong. As a graphic designer for many, many decades, if I need to boost saturation on something graphical, I don't want algorithms or things being favored. I need the color to go up or down, the saturation to go up or down, and I need it to be predictable, right? Okay, what about we take the same image and now let's put it in lab, okay? And go to hue and saturation and maximize it. Boom, we get a new level. Now nothing is safe. Nothing is sacred. Everything has been pushed to the maximum. Even like, why in the world is this dirt bright red? That's because there's a hue in there that's in that range, somewhere probably between, I don't know, 345 and 15. And it's just maximizing it with no consideration of light areas. See, the clouds are very, very light. You know what? Let's push a maximum. Now we have green and neon cyan. Now, is this a great thing? No, not necessarily. But you can see how it pushes it even further. So here is saturation. Let's clarify this. This is saturation at maximum on RGB. This is saturation at maximum on lab. So that's like a fourth sort of, if you really want to get experimental, there's a whole discussion on lab that we can have, don't get me wrong, but you can see the bottom line is, especially for shots like this that have a lot of color, landscapes and architectural, maybe even product, when you boost color with saturation on the Vibrance adjustment layer, you can really make this much more extreme if you want and still sort of protect your lower saturated areas. And you can use Vibrance to get a really subtle look and just kind of bring in some color depth, if you will, in a subtle way. But again, you can also understand why the secondary slider is here. So you can push Vibrance a little further with a different saturation as needed. Well, anyway, I hope that made sense. I had a little technical glitch on the computer there, but I don't want to re-record all this. So I hope it made sense. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below or drop me an email, nbp@ninobatista.com.